I'm a boat builder from the Cotswolds in the UK, and I'm currently building a boat called Temptress, designed by Michel Berrier and kitted by myself to be built utilising the latest in CAD design, CNC cutting and modern epoxy wood construction. In this video we're going to be taking a look at building frame 2, which is right up in the forward end of the boat, but it's one of the first frames that is going to be visible within the finished boat cockpit area. So we want to take a little bit of extra care over this one. We're going to be doing some veneering of a plywood sheet, so included with that we're going to be resawing some veneers from our solid wood stock. We're going to be doing some vacuum bagging to glue those down to our plywood. And then I'm going to be creating a lamination that goes around the inside of the open aperture in this frame. So we're going to be doing a few extra things alongside our normal frame building and carving process. The first thing we need to do is to get some veneers cut for our bulkhead. So we're going to start out downstairs on the bandsaw and do a bit of resawing work. Okay, so here's my bulkhead for frame 2, and I've got my veneers here. So this is what we're going to be covering the face of this bulkhead with. So it's going to be our visible face that we see within the boat. And the red embossed film is our vacuum bag. So I've made an envelope which is going to encase this once we've got all the veneers placed, and that will hold them down in a really tough way. So we'll see that in just a second. So I've got a centre line marked, so I'm just going to work out from that, I think. I've got these veneers, of course, are consecutively cut from the same board, and I think it would be quite nice to book match them. It's just an extra little detail that looks really nice. So basically that involves, if you imagine that these are all cut from one stack of timber, book matching them basically involves opening that up, folding that out like a book, and then you can see that the grain is a mirrored version of itself.
I've got pretty straight grain with these boards really, so it's not massive, but it's one of those details that I think just looks nice. When you look forward in the boat, you'll see a mirrored grain. So we'll run that down the center line here. And you know, that's the sort of gist of what we're going to get from the layout. What I'll probably do is cut these middles out. I don't want to be wasting too much of this really, so I think I will probably cut those out and then gap that down and then carry on from here so I don't waste too much veneer. So I'm going to get trimming those and I'll get them laid out on the bulkhead and we'll take a look at what it's going to look like. Okay, so there's my veneers all cut and placed. You can see that we've got the book matching effect here, so the grain for this one is a mirror image of the grain for this one, and so on and so forth. It's probably a detail that no one will ever really notice in the boat, but I know it's there and somebody might notice it. I think it's just nice to take pride in little details like that. So as you can see, we're a little bit oversized on the inside, so I'll trim all this round afterwards once the veneers are glued on. And I've taped them all together so that we just keep these seams nice and tight. I'm hoping that I can pretty much just roll this up and then get the epoxy applied and glue it into place. So we're a little bit short right up the top there, but there's going to be a cutout for the shear clamp there, so I don't think it's worth messing around putting a tiny little piece up in there. I think we'll be okay. Okay, that works. So what I've done is I split the veneer stack up the middle and then I've put each half the other way over so I can wet out the underside of the veneers on on those either side, and then onto my bulkhead as well. And that's also going to help me to realign, because I've got that center line established up there, so I can realign based on that, and hopefully everything will go back in the right place. So let's mix up some epoxy. Okay, so to glue these veneers, we've got some West System 105-206 epoxy in here, and then you can see that I've thickened that with the 405 filleting blend. It's only lightly thickened because we've got such a fine glue line here. We don't really want this to be particularly thick. And the reason that I use the filleting blend for this is that I like to do wood colored glue joints on anything that's going to be visible. Now this, as you can see, is a little bit too light for what we're working on, so I'm going to add my own little custom mahogany dust. So this is just belt sander shavings from Mahogany Sapele, something that just adds a little bit more colour to the mix. So just put in a scoop of that to darken off this mix a little bit more. And there we go, nice chocolate brownie texture epoxy mix ready to glue down our veneers. Okay, so the benefit of colour in that mix is that if we get anything come through the joints in between the veneers here, we've got fairly tight lines on them, but the chances are we're going to get something come through them. This is just going to be the correct colour for our timber. So the thing is, if you use like a colloidal silica for this, when you get that come through the glue line, sometimes you'll get a white line where the transition is between a plank, and in time, if it's exposed to UV on a sort of exterior part of the boat, then you'll actually see that go yellow, and you'll get a yellowing to the glue line between parts, which is not what you want. So in any scenario where I'm going to have a bright finished component and the glue line is potentially going to be part of that mix, I will use this mixture of the filleting blend and a little bit of colour just put in from my own mahogany powders as well. So again, I'm using the notch spreader here just to get that evenly distributed across the face of the bulkhead. Okay, so we've got our veneers upside down in either half. So they're wetted out with the 105-206 epoxy, unthickened, and just letting that soak into that wood grain there. Then the plywood is wetted out with the unthickened 105-206, and then we've got that thickened mixture applied with the fine tooth notched spreader. So again, we don't want a huge amount of glue in this area really. This is going to be a really tight pull down, especially when we vacuum bag it. So we don't need a lot of gap filling. Nice even coverage there that we get with that notch spreader. So you can see we've got an even glue line all over our surface. And that has got a little bit of colour in it, just in case we get any come through the veneers. So let's get those placed, and we'll get the bag sealed up and we'll get that pulled down. Okay, so I'm going to make an envelope with this vacuum bag. So I've got a piece going along the bottom of the part, and then I'm going to fold that over and then create a seal around the 3 faces. So what I want to do is get some bagging tape around the outside of that, and that's what's going to seal our layers of bag together. Get that stuck down nice and flat without any creases in the bag. Okay, so that's the setup. So I'm going to fold the bag down this line here and create an envelope that's going to go all the way around that frame and just pull that in from either side. And with a bit of luck, I'll be able to reuse this bagging film and envelope for the other frames that we've got to do as well. So I want to keep it in fairly good order if I can. So let's get that folded over, we'll get the pump on and get that all pulled down. That's what the veneers look like, by the way. So you can see we've just this handful of little speckles here, so that's just the unthickened epoxy that's just coming through that wood grain. So we've got a good penetration of that glue there, which is looking nice. So let's get it bagged up. Okay, so if you saw the video I did on vacuum bagging before when we did the little model behind, you might remember that we put some little pleats in the bag, and that was to allow it to pull in around a sort of non-uniform shape of the hull. We're not really going to need to do that with this because it's such a flat shape. This is going to form quite a nice little neat envelope, so we're not really going to need to do that. It's kind of something that you have to do if it's a very curved shape and there's lots of, you need to allow excess bag to pull in really. But providing we can get this all stuck down nice and neatly, we shouldn't need to do that. We might need to if we just end up with a little pinch at the end of the bag somewhere, but should be okay. Okay, there we go. We've got just over -0.8 bar on the pressure. So that's the maximum vacuum that my pump will pull, which is a good sign. There's no sign of leaks around our perimeter here, so I'm really pleased with that. This is a relatively easy thing to get sealed, to be honest. Had to do a little pleat there just to take up the excess where all the bag came in together, but we've got an incredible hold down on there. It's very difficult to lift that little fold there, so we've got a huge pull down across the whole surface of that frame. You can actually see the little indent of the 2 holes there in that frame where it's pulled it down that hard. So really pleased with that. That's going to get us a nice consolidation of those veneers, purge all the air out from in between the laminations, and you can see the squeeze out that we've got coming up through that central joint there. So that's the reason that I like to use a coloured epoxy in that, just so that we're not going to have any potential white colloidal silica in the finished face of it. So we'll leave that running. That will run till at least that epoxy kicks, so that's probably going to be 4 to 6 hours, I would think. I'd be happy with it at this sort of temperature I'm currently working at. So we'll leave that running, and then I'll come back and we'll open up the parcel a bit later on. Okay, so we'll take a little look at the vacuum bag setup. I'll show you through what I'm doing here. So got a Becker vacuum pump down there, and that runs through to our catch pot. So the catch pot is just there as a fail-safe really, so if we get any resin come through our vacuum line, it will fall down into the little cup that's inside that. Just a paper cup in there, and it will prevent that from going through into our vacuum pump and damaging that, because we don't want that to happen. So we've got a pressure gauge on the pump and on the catch pot as well. And that just indicates what pressure we're able to pull. So -1 is going to be a true vacuum, but this pump will generally pull to about -0.8. So then that runs through up into our bag, and then we've got what we call a breech here. So this is how we seal that hose into the bag setup that we've got. And mine's a little bit of a bodge at the moment, because if you remember from my previous video, I pulled a bit of resin up through those and ruined the rest of my breeches last time I did this. Not going to do that in this scenario, because it's very unlikely that we're going to pull any resin through that. So I get a few people ask me about this bag type. This is made, I think it's by ProSet, and it's called their teak deck bagging film. Now it's slightly embossed with this pattern on it. And what that means is that it allows you to vacuum bag without the need for a breather fabric. So normally you'd have a smooth bag surface. Underneath that you'd have a breather fabric, which is a little bit like a sort of flat cotton wool really. And that just allows the vacuum, the airflow to travel evenly all throughout your part, so that you don't get the bag sucked down and just close together and then just create a vacuum in a small area. This allows a nice even pull down over the entire surface without the need for an additional breather film. So it's really nice, because it's just one product. It's less sort of consumables to use in this process, and it works really well for wood hold down scenarios, which is what I'm doing here. So there's a number of different ways that we can vacuum bag, and we'll look at that throughout the process of this build. When it comes to actually planking the bottom of the boat, we'll do vacuum bagging in a slightly different way. Basically what we're doing with this is we're pulling a vacuum inside the bag. So we're dropping the atmospheric pressure inside the bag, and that creates a difference between the air that's outside it, and it creates a compression of our part equally inwards from all directions. So it's this is basically just a clamping system, but it's a really unparalleled clamping system. It gives an even pressure over the entire area, and that a true vacuum, that equates to 1 kilogram per square centimetre of surface area. So you can imagine over a part this size, that's a massive amount of pressure, but it's a pressure exactly where we want it, all in from all directions. Nice even compression and a constant compression on our part. If we were to do something like to staple these veneers down, we've only got a point loading, so we're only pulling down where the 2 points of that staple actually land into our part. And it's highly likely that you're going to get voids and things like that within a glue up like this if you just use staples, whereas this is going to purge all the air out from within our lamination, and yeah, it's really quite unparalleled. So what we're doing here is we're doing an envelope. So I've got the bag underneath the part, and I've got the bag over the part. So the entire envelope has a negative pressure inside the sealed bag, and then that creates a positive compression from the atmosphere around it, and it squashes our part in. When we do the bottom of the boat, what we'll do is we'll actually use the first layer of planking of the boat to create that underside of the bag, and we'll just put a bag on from the top and seal it in a slightly different way. But we'll get to that. It's a little bit further down the line. We're quite a way off planking the boat yet. So there we go, we've got a nice, you can see we've got epoxy coming right through a lot of this wood grain, certainly in the joints, so that's the reason for me wanting to put some colour into that, just so it doesn't affect our final finish, but we'll be able to sand all that back okay. And you can see we've got a really tight glue line all the way down the edge there, and all over the entire face, which is what we really want. So we'll get that downstairs, get the edges cleaned up, and have a better look at what we've got. Okay, so there's side one. Looking really smart. I'm pretty happy with the lines between veneers here. There's only a couple of them that are kind of really visible. They're pretty good, most of these, so I'm pleased with that. That's going to look really smart once it's finished. You see, if you look along the edge, the quality of the glue up there, so that's really good. Still a little bit of epoxy on there that we'll clean up when we do the carving process, but that's okay. But no voids whatsoever in anything on that, so I'm really happy with that. That's going to last many, many years to come, which is good. So that's one side down. I'll get and do the same on the second side, and then we'll take a look at what we're going to do with this opening up in here. All right, it's looking pretty nice, this bulkhead, isn't it? It's quite strange to think that one day I might actually be crawling through this to put fenders and ropes and things like that up in here, but that's a long way off. We'll get there eventually. So the next thing to do, we've done both of the face veneers. The next thing to do is now to put a piece of trim around the inside of this aperture here, because this is going to be a crawl space, so we want to protect the edges of this and soften it off. So put a little piece of trim around there, and there's a number of ways I've thought about doing that. I could of course CNC cut some parts that are going to fit around here and do this kind of segmented in pieces. That's really quite wasteful of wood, and we've also got the potential of getting quite a bit of end grain running out as we turn the corners, unless we put loads of segments in there, and that's going to get a bit unnecessarily complicated. So what I think I'm going to try and do is build a lamination that curves around the inside of this, and then add some various different bits onto that. I did a similar thing when I did the combing on the stapler, and I sort of built a lamination in place because it curved in two different planes, and that worked really well. So I think I'm going to try a similar thing for this, but we'll see how that's going to work. I'm going to get some bits of the veneer that were left over from doing the faces of this and see what's going to manage that curve, and we'll go from there. Okay, so that's going to work. I'm pleased with that. This is a 3mm piece of veneer, so I started at 3mm and then I took them down to 1.5. So you can see that's made the curve really nicely. It's probably right on the edge. I don't think you get away with much thicker than that. And lengthwise as well, that's a stroke of luck. I don't think I could have got that much closer if I tried. So I'm pretty pleased with that. I was thinking of doing a few layers of laminations on this, but actually I think 3 is probably enough. And then the plan is that I'm going to do a square section lamination as well, which is going to fit around the inside of this. So that'll make our cross section a bit thicker. It'll allow me to round the corner off of this nicely. and give a nice sort of soft transition. So you can see we've got a bit of material either side, and the plan is to put a square on either side, try and get this around about the middle. Yeah, I think that's going to work really well actually. Just do a bit more work with clamps to try and pull in those corners, get them nice and tight fitting. Okay, so I've got my piece of veneer cut around the inside. Just going to show you what I've done here. So you can see that I've cut the finishing end a little bit longer than the start. And the idea with that is that I'm going to use this to press an extra bit of tension into this. So just to get these really nice and tightly pressed into the corners. They're pretty good already actually, but an extra bit of help wouldn't hurt. So what I'm actually going to do with that is just pull that down, and then I'll tuck it up and in like that. And you can see that that's just got a really tight fit on that now. So as I clamp this up, and I will clamp it all the way around, what that's going to do is just put an extra bit of pressure into all these and get us a really tight fit when we come to glue up. So let's get gluing up. Okay, so same process as always. West System 105-206 epoxy. We're going to wet out all of our surfaces first with unthickened epoxy, then apply some thickened epoxy. Now that's especially important for scenarios like this, because we're gluing onto end grain plywood, and that stuff is like a sponge, so it's going to absorb a lot of epoxy. We want to make sure that's well wetted out before we attempt to bond anything to it, otherwise we'll get a really dry glue joint, which we don't want.
Okay, so my top recommendations for cleaning up epoxy work. This is quite messy. It always was going to be a messy process doing this. There's a couple of things that can really help out with getting that clean. Number one is timing. Like get the cleanup process timed just right. So this epoxy I put on this morning, and it's hard enough that nothing's going to move now, but it's still sort of soft and rubbery. So it's a perfect time to get it cleaned up without having to get too heavy-handed. Secondly is going to be a chisel. This is my number one epoxy cleanup tool. I use it like a scraper, really high angle to the wood, and I just pull it backwards. And if you can hear that sort of sound, that's exactly what you want it to be doing, taking off fine little shavings. But it's really good for something like this where I'm cleaning up into a square corner, and I can just scrape off that soft epoxy. And even when I'm working in the vicinity of veneers, this is a fairly thick veneer on here, but even if it was thin, you still got to be quite careful. So there you can see I'm just doing this internal face here, a couple of scrapes with the chisel, and it gets us back nice and clean, gets us a good square corner on that, which is what we're aiming for. And then you see this is what we're starting with. So we've got a bit of bleed and stuff here, even with the tape in place. Actually the tape was probably outside of this, you know, it's very difficult to be entirely clean from the get-go with epoxy work, but this is the best way I've found for cleaning stuff up. So do it nice and early whilst it's still soft, and a chisel for a scraper. So there's a look at the finished bulkhead, and you can see our nice rounded off timber moulding around the inside of that aperture. See those laminations there. So I'm really pleased with how that's come out, and here's our frame. I haven't showed you building the frame, but you guys have seen this before if you've been watching the series. So there's frame 2. So we'll get the two of those paired up, and we'll take a look at the assembly before we start carving it. Okay, so the bulkhead is attached, and that's what we're looking at. Looks really smart, I think. I'm going to put a little radius just on the inside edges of this. I'll do that on all the frames actually, same as I've done on the gussets here, just to soften off all the edges. So I'll probably do that after the carving process, which is coming up next. So we're ready to get this onto the CNC machine and fire off another carving operation. So let's get on with that. So there we have it, one beautiful boat frame. This is, I'm really pleased with how this has come out actually. The veneers look really good on the ply, and I'm really glad I went down that route versus just using standard plywood, because you really can't get any plywood that's got grain like this on it, that's for sure. Certainly not in this country anyway. So yeah, I'm really pleased. The carving process is continuing to improve as well. I've got a better finish on the cuts on that, so that's come out really neat. I'm really happy with that. Pretty much the only change that I've done this time around is that I put a small fillet on any external edge. It's something that somebody mentioned in the comments on the last video, so I can't remember who they were, but thank you very much for that. And so I just put a little 1mm fillet on every external edge, and that just has caused the cutter to just sort of ease into a cut rather than sort of jabbing into it at 90 degrees. And just that 1mm fillet is enough to just soften the entry to all of these, and we've got a really good finish on the cutout, so I'm really pleased with that. Little refinements one by one, making the process better. Alignment worked really well with this frame. I didn't do any of the kind of tracing stuff that I did before on the previous video. I just drilled the holes, put it on, and just got on with it. I think with the sort of tolerances that I'm working to within the boat, this system is actually working really well. And we had, you know, just taking off tiny little skims inside this keel cutout is a really good indication that we've got things lined up, and this definitely was in this one. So that's really good. I'm going to confidently press on with the rest of the frames using that same system, which is cool. So I want to say a massive thank you again, as always, to the patrons that are supporting this project and to the sponsors as well. It's really a big help towards me actually making this a possibility and making it you know, a viable option that it might actually just work. So really appreciate your support. Thank you very much, guys. So if you'd like to support the project in any way outside of just watching the videos, then I would massively appreciate that. And the best way to do that is probably through Patreon. So you can pledge a small monthly amount that's going to help to go into the pot to fund this entire modern wooden boat building R&D project that I hope to share with the rest of the world. So I'd really appreciate that if you're able to support in any way, whatever you can do. If not, just watch the videos, and I'd appreciate that as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. In the next one, we'll get on with making the stem and work towards setting up the forward end of the boat as a little trial fit. That'll be really interesting because we'll get to see how some of this 3D stuff is actually going to pan out. So thanks for watching. Cheers, guys. I will catch you in the next one.